Most people do not have an income problem. First, they have a machine problem. They take a dollar earned with stress, time, traffic, compromise, and discipline, and the moment it lands, they feed it into a broken machine that was designed to make them look stable while keeping them financially weak. That is the first brutal truth. A large salary can enter a bad machine and disappear. A modest salary can enter a good machine and begin building freedom. I have watched people spend 20 years trying to solve a mathematical problem with emotion. They tell themselves they need more income, a better market, lower rates, a luckier break, a more generous employer. What they usually need is a different allocation machine. They need a system that tells every dollar where it is allowed to go before appetite, anxiety, status, boredom, and convenience take over. If you do not build that machine, your life will build one for you. And the machine life builds is ugly. It spends first, it panics second, it hopes third, it owns nothing. That is why a person can earn a good living and still feel hunted by money. Their income arrives as labor and leaves as lifestyle. Nothing stays behind to defend them. Nothing compounds, nothing grows teeth, nothing buys back their time. They keep mistaking movement for progress because every month money comes in and every month money goes out. So the whole thing feels active, but activity is not control. Motion is not wealth. Salary is not safety. I have spent most of my life studying allocation. People think investing is picking securities. That is a tiny part of it. The deeper game is deciding what each dollar is permitted to become. A dollar can become dinner, noise, image, habit, relief, insurance, optionality, ownership, or future freedom. The quality of your financial life is shaped less by what you earn than by what your dollars are allowed to become after you earn them. So if you want a rule that works whether you make $10,000 or $1 million a year, I would not start with cleverness. I would start with architecture. I would build a 3-chamber allocation machine. The first chamber controls consumption. The second chamber absorbs shocks. The third chamber turns labor into ownership. If those 3 chambers are working, your money begins behaving like a disciplined employee instead of a frightened tourist. If they are broken, no raise will save you for long. I would put a hard ceiling on consumption at 75% of income. I would direct 10% into a real cash buffer until the buffer is fully built. I would force at least 15% toward ownership and compounding. And once the buffer is finished, I would push even more into that third chamber. That sounds simple. Good. The best systems are simple enough to survive your worst moods. The reason most people fail is not that personal finance is too complicated. It is that they refuse to build rules strong enough to survive desire. They want flexibility in the wrong place. They want the freedom to overspend, underprepare, and postpone ownership. Then they call the result bad luck. Let me translate the first chamber clearly. 75 cents out of every dollar is the most you are allowed to consume, not the target for a glamorous life. The ceiling. That ceiling includes the obvious things like housing, food, utilities, transportation, and ordinary living. It also includes the dangerous little lies that people like to hide from themselves. The subscriptions that feel harmless, the upgrade that seems deserved, the vacation financed by fatigue, the convenience spending that appears small because it arrives in fragments, the car payment that quietly becomes a second rent payment, the entertainment package that was purchased in the name of relaxation but slowly became background leakage. Most people hear a rule like that and immediately imagine deprivation. That reaction tells you how thoroughly consumption has colonized their thinking. I am not telling you to live like a monk. I am telling you to stop confusing spending with quality of life. Those are not the same thing. Plenty of people destroy their future in order to maintain a presentable standard of living that does not even make them happy after the novelty wears off. The wealthy people I have known are often much less interested in looking rich than poor people. Imagine they care about value, not theater. I have seen successful people examine a dinner bill with more discipline than struggling people examine a car loan. They are not being cheap, they are refusing to let ego make routine decisions for them. Arithmetic does not embarrass them, waste does. That is one of the major psychological splits between people who build wealth and people who rent the appearance of it. The poor ego says, I earned this, so I should enjoy it. The strong mind says, I earned this, so I must allocate it correctly. Those are not the same sentence. One leads to a short pleasure loop. The other leads to refusal power. Now, I want to be precise about the first chamber because amateur savers often misunderstand it. The point is not to attack every small pleasure. That is childish finance. A $5 coffee is not your enemy if it truly delivers value, energy, enjoyment, or a calmer day. If a small expense creates more real utility than it costs, I am not interested in scolding you for it. Finance is not a morality play. It is an allocation problem. What destroys people is not usually the coffee. It is the oversized house, the oversized car, the oversized identity, the oversized assumptions, and the habit of buying large things that produce a brief emotional spike and then become ordinary. That is where the machine breaks. People will agonize over grocery coupons and then sign for a $70,000 car that becomes emotionally invisible in 90 days. They will debate a streaming bill and then drag a major purchase into their life that changes the next 5 years of cash flow. That is not thrift. That is financial theater. So the first chamber is a discipline chamber. It makes you ask a different question. Not, can I afford this? But, does this deserve a place inside the 75% chamber, or is it stealing space from something more valuable? That one question changes almost everything, because a spending ceiling does two things at once. First, it forces substitution. It pressures you to look for cheaper ways to get the same utility or better utility at the same price. That is healthy. Constraints sharpen judgment. A person with no spending boundaries becomes intellectually lazy. They use money to avoid thinking. Second, it forces prioritization. If you know the chamber has a limit, you stop pretending every desire has equal standing. It does not. Some purchases support your energy, your family, your health, your work, or your sanity. Some merely advertise an identity. One belongs inside the machine. The other should be rejected. This is where people discover a painful truth. Their budget is not tight because they lack money. Their budget is tight because too many low-value claims are fighting for access to the same dollar. Now, let me tell you the part almost no one understands. If you spend less than 75%, the difference is not permission to inflate your life. It is raw fuel. That difference is one of the most important numbers in your financial life because it reveals whether the machine is beginning to work. If you can live on 68%, 62%, or 55%, congratulations. You did not find room for nicer toys. You found additional future freedom. That surplus should move deeper into the machine, not back into consumption. This is why so many raises fail to produce wealth. A person gets a raise. Their consumption chamber swells to absorb it, and they celebrate the exact behavior that keeps them dependent. Their life looks larger, but their power does not. They upgraded surfaces instead of systems. Lifestyle creep is one of the most elegant traps in modern life because it disguises fragility as success. The bigger apartment feels like progress. The luxury lease feels like progress. The more expensive routines feel like progress. But if those upgrades increase the amount of labor required to keep the machine running, then from a strategic perspective, you did not move up. You moved deeper into captivity. The strongest financial move after an income increase is not celebration. It is rerouting. You take as much of that increase as possible and prevent it from being adopted by your living standard. That is how you create separation between income growth and spending growth. That separation is where capital begins. Now we move to the second chamber, the shock absorber. The cushion fund. This chamber does not exist to impress anyone. It exists to stop life from extorting you. That sentence matters. Most people think emergency savings are boring because they do not understand the economics of desperation. If you have no buffer, then every surprise arrives with leverage against you. A medical bill, a car repair, a sudden move, a broken appliance, a temporary job loss, an urgent flight, a family crisis, a home problem, a dead laptop, a missed paycheck. Without a shock chamber, each one of those events is not just inconvenient. It becomes a negotiation in which the world names the price and your fear signs the contract. That is how people end up taking awful loans, carrying toxic credit card balances, raiding retirement accounts, selling good assets at bad times, or begging for rescue from institutions that were never designed to love them. More than half of adults cannot easily handle even a modest prize expense. That is not because they are foolish by nature. It is because the machine they were taught to run had no second chamber. It assumed smooth conditions forever. Cash reserve is not laziness. It is anti-extortion capital. If your monthly life costs $2,000, I would want roughly 5 months of expenses built in cash. If your life costs $4,000, I want a larger buffer. Not because I think cash is a high return asset. It is not. I want it because the second chamber changes the tone of your life. It lowers the cortisol in your decision making. It makes you harder to bully. It lets you solve a problem with cash instead of panic. I have seen what happens when a person has no second chamber. A single repair bill can turn them into a borrower. A bad week can become a bad year. They begin making choices based on urgency instead of logic. That is an expensive way to live. Scarcity does not merely reduce your options. It taxes your judgment. A sound financial machine assumes shocks are coming and prices them into the system. And where should that cushion live? In a place built for availability and yield, not vanity loyalty to a giant bank that pays almost nothing for the privilege of holding your money. Too many people leave this chamber asleep in traditional savings accounts that barely compensate them at all. If a higher yielding cash account lets the reserve earn something meaningful while remaining liquid and stable, use it. The point is not to get rich in the cushion chamber. The point is to let idle defense at least earn a respectable wage while it waits. There is another critical point here. You do not save endlessly into the second chamber. This is where savers accidentally become timid. Once the shock absorber is fully built, the job of that chamber changes. You maintain it. You do not worship it. Too many people keep pouring money into cash long after the cash has served its strategic purpose. They mistake safety for progress. But money that is perpetually hiding is money that is not learning how to compound. The second chamber should protect your life. It should not become your whole philosophy. That is why the third chamber matters most over the long run. The compounding chamber, the ownership chamber, the future engine. This is where labor stops being the end of the story. School trains people to become capable earners. Very few institutions train people to become owners. So millions of adults know how to make money through effort, but have no system for converting effort into assets. They collect paychecks as if paychecks themselves were wealth. They are not. A paycheck is a transfer. Wealth begins when enough of that transfer is redirected into things that keep working when you stop. That is why I insist on the third chamber. At least 15% of every dollar must be pushed toward future ownership. Not someday. Not after the house is perfect, not after the car is upgraded, not after the children are older. Now, if you postpone ownership until life feels easy, you will postpone it for decades because life will always present a reason to keep capital in the present. The machine must override that instinct. The rule exists precisely because your emotions cannot be trusted to choose long-term power over short-term relief every month. Now, let me make the wealth logic brutally clear. If all your income comes from your labor, then your entire financial life depends on your continued ability and willingness to work. That is fragile. You may be skilled, you may be disciplined, you may be admired, it is still fragile. Assets are different. Assets can continue working through your sleep, your illness, your vacation, your indifference, and eventually your absence. The wealthy are not wealthy because they found a magical work ethic that nobody else can copy. They are wealthy because a large share of their income eventually comes from ownership rather than effort. This is the worker versus owner divide. Workers trade hours for money. Owners arrange capital so that money produces more money. A good life can begin as a worker. A free life must increasingly become an owner. And if you want the third chamber to work, you should respect the tax structure around it. Tax is not a footnote. It is one of the major forces shaping compounding over time. A tax-advantaged account is not a boring administrative detail. It is a channel through which a larger fraction of returns gets to remain yours. So when you have access to a Roth IRA, pay attention. Money that enters after tax and compounds inside that structure can produce future gains that are extraordinarily efficient because qualified withdrawals can come out untaxed. That matters over decades. Protecting growth from future taxation is not a small optimization. It is a structural advantage. I have seen how powerful that can become when gains are allowed to compound inside the right wrapper. The future tax bill does not reach in and tear away a chunk of your patience. The compounding stays cleaner. The ownership chamber keeps more of what it produced, and when you have access to a 401k, especially one with an employer match, pay even closer attention. I want you to think about a match correctly. It is not a perk. It is a flashing sign that says free capital available if you follow instructions. Failing to capture an employer match is like walking past money that was set on the table for you because the paperwork looked boring. That is not rebellion. That is self-sabotage disguised as procrastination. If your employer will match the first slice of your contribution, capture it. Immediately, few legal moves in personal finance offer that kind of instant return. If you earn a salary and the company will add money, because you routed part of your paycheck into the third chamber. That is not complicated finance. That is discipline being paid. Then keep going. The point is not to collect account types like trophies. The point is to use the third chamber to keep funneling labor into assets in the most efficient channels available to you. Roth structures, 401k structures, and similar tax-aware vehicles exist because the compounding machine is sensitive to friction taxes, fees, and bad behavior all create drag. Your job is to reduce the drag. There is one more mistake I need to attack because it quietly ruins years of progress. Some people open the account, fund the account, congratulate themselves, and then leave the cash sitting there doing almost nothing because they never actually buy the investment. That is like building an engine, pouring in fuel, and never turning the key. An account is a container. It is not the asset. You still must select the investment that will do the compounding work inside the container. Too many adults lose years because they were satisfied by the paperwork and forgot the purpose. Never let the third chamber go idle simply because you mistook the wrapper for the engine. And what should most people own inside that chamber? For most people, broad index funds and broad diversified equity exposure are enough. That answer sounds almost offensively simple to people who crave complexity. That is one reason complexity sells so well. It flatters the ego. It makes people feel like they are doing something advanced. But complicated is not the same as intelligent. A diversified basket of productive businesses, accumulated steadily over long periods, is a brutally effective engine. It is not exciting every day. Good daily excitement is usually a bad sign in finance. Owning a broad market fund means you do not need to bet your future on one story, one chief executive, one product cycle, one prediction, or one moment of confidence. You spread your claim across a large group of companies, and you let productivity, profitability, innovation, and time do most of the heavy lifting. That is not glamorous, it is powerful, and the power becomes visible only when you stop interrupting it. $100 invested each month over a very long stretch can end up becoming a multiple of the original contributions that feels almost unfair to the undisciplined observer. The observer sees a large ending number and imagines brilliance. The truth is usually repetition, modest sums, routed consistently into a compounding engine for decades, can become enormously larger than the cash you personally inserted. That is what happens when time begins working harder than you do. Compounding is patient, but it is not forgiving. It helps the person who starts. It punishes the person who delays. The first years feel slow, which is why so many people quit. They are still trapped in salary logic. Salary logic expects visible rewards for effort in the near term. Ownership logic often feels quiet at the start. The numbers look unremarkable. The habit feels anticlimactic. But the early years are not wasted. They are constructing the base rate of your future. You are teaching the machine what to do with every dollar before the numbers become large enough to flatter you. And this is where I want to confront a lie. Many adults keep telling themselves, they say, I will invest seriously when I earn more. That is backwards. You do not become an investor by reaching an income level. You become an investor by building a machine that allocates a slice of whatever income you already have. Higher income helps, of course, but a person who never learns to route capital at $50,000 a year usually does not suddenly become disciplined at $150,000 a year. They just make more expensive mistakes. The machine must be built before the flood arrives. Otherwise, the flood only creates a larger mess. This is why the three chambers belong together. If you focus only on the first chamber, you can become a joyless optimizer who saves money but never builds ownership. If you focus only on the second chamber, you can become a fearful accumulator who hoards cash but never lets capital work. If you focus only on the third chamber without the second, you can become overexposed and fragile, forced to liquidate or borrow at exactly the wrong moments when life punches you. The machine works because each chamber corrects the weakness of the others. The spending chamber keeps life from eating the whole dollar. The cushion chamber prevents shocks from derailing the system. The ownership chamber turns discipline into future freedom. That is architecture. That is why it can work at different income levels. Now let me apply some psychological pressure, because most financial failure is not mathematical. It is emotional. People overspend because they are tired. They undersave because the emergency has not happened yet. They underinvest because retirement is abstract and next week is vivid. They keep subscriptions because cancellation creates tiny discomfort. They overpay for convenience because friction feels expensive. In the moment, they buy symbols because identity feels urgent. They postpone system building because chaos is familiar. Every one of those choices feels small. Together, they teach your money to obey impulse rather than design. You have to understand what kind of life that creates. It creates a life where your job must carry everything. A life where one setback can infect the next 12 months. A life where every raise gets pre-consumed before it arrives. A life where you appear employed but remain economically naked. That is not middle-class stability. That is polished fragility. The people who eventually gain real financial strength are usually not the people with the flashiest opinions. They are the people willing to let simple rules feel repetitive. They accept that a strong life is often built through disciplined monotony. They know the machine is supposed to feel a little boring because boredom is the emotional sensation of not being in a financial emergency. There is something else I want you to see. A machine like this does more than grow wealth. It changes character. The spending chamber teaches you to separate value from vanity. The cushion chamber teaches you to respect uncertainty without surrendering to fear. The ownership chamber teaches you to think beyond the current paycheck and identify with future freedom rather than immediate consumption. That is a profound shift. You stop seeing money as a substance that arrives and disappears. You start seeing it as a stream that can be directed. Once you see that clearly, you can never quite return to financial sleep. Every purchase begins to reveal its true cost. Every account begins to reveal its role. Every raise begins to ask for a decision. That is the kind of awakening adults need. Not more tips, not more hacks. Not another burst of guilt after a bad month. They need a machine strong enough to carry them through ordinary life without requiring endless negotiation with themselves. Let me speak directly to the person who says this all sounds good but impossible at their current income. I understand the objection low income makes every percentage harder. When income is tight, 75% can feel unrealistic, 10% can feel painful, and 15% can sound like a fantasy. But listen carefully. The machine is not valuable because perfection is easy. It is valuable because the direction is correct. Even if you must approach the target in stages, the architecture still matters. You still need a spending ceiling, a shock absorber, and an ownership channel. Without them, every increase in income will simply vanish into the same broken machine that kept you weak before. Do not use difficulty as an excuse to avoid design. Use difficulty as proof that design matters even more. If you cannot hit every percentage today, Begin by building the behavior. Cut the most useless large expense. Start the cushion chamber with embarrassing consistency if necessary. Capture the employer match if it exists. Open the tax-advantaged account, automate the first small contribution, choose the broad diversified fund, lower the friction of good behavior until the machine starts moving. Motion matters because once the machine begins, it starts teaching you. It teaches you what expenses were never essential. It teaches you how much calmer life feels with cash defense. It teaches you that ownership is not a luxury for the rich, but a requirement for anyone who wants to stop being owned by circumstance. And if your income rises later, the machine is ready. That is the point. You do not build the machine because you are already free. You build it so freedom can eventually happen. Now let me say something uncomfortable to the person who earns very well and still feels stuck. You are not stuck because you earn too little. You are stuck because your machine is bloated. High income without allocation, discipline can be one of the most deceptive traps in modern life. It lets you purchase the appearance of success while delaying actual wealth for years. It can finance a life that looks enviable from outside and remains financially unimpressive underneath. The spending chamber becomes enormous. The cushion chamber stays underbuilt. The ownership chamber gets whatever scraps remain. And everyone applauds because your visible lifestyle got better. That applause is dangerous. The world celebrates expensive evidence faster than invisible discipline. But invisible discipline is what buys freedom. Not applause, not appearances. Not the temporary status of looking like someone whose machine is working when it actually is not. I have no interest in helping you look rich. I am interested in helping you become hard to corner. That is why I like the three-chamber machine. It is not about being severe for the sake of severity. It is about increasing your refusal power when enough of your life is defended by cash reserves and enough of your future is fed by assets. You become harder to manipulate. You can say no to a bad boss more easily. You can survive a layoff with less panic. You can endure a market decline without liquidating everything in terror. You can make decisions from strategy instead of scarcity. That is wealth before the yacht. That is wealth before the headline. That is wealth before the social media proof. And it begins with telling each dollar the truth. 75 cents may serve your life now, but it may not own your future. 10 cents must stand guard against chaos until the guard post is fully staffed. 15 cents and every spare dollar beyond that must go to the compounding engine. Because if labor remains your only engine, then time will eventually corner you. This is the final test. When your next dollar arrives, what machine will receive it? The broken one that spends to soothe, saves too little to defend, and invests too late to matter. Or the disciplined one that limits consumption, builds anti-extortion cash, and keeps routing more of your labor into assets until your future starts carrying part of your present. That is the door. Walk through it and your life may still contain stress, bad markets, repairs, layoffs, and disappointment. But you will stop being financially helpless inside them, refuse it, and the bill will not arrive all at once. That is what makes the trap so dangerous. It will arrive slowly as dependence, slowly as thin margins, slowly as panic, slowly as years spent earning money that never stayed long enough to become yours. That is the choice, not someday. Now, because every dollar is a vote for the machine that will govern your life. And one day, much sooner than you think, you will discover which machine you have been feeding. If yours has been the broken one, the bill will arrive as stress, dependence, and years that cannot be reclaimed. If yours has been the disciplined one, the payoff will arrive quietly, lower fear, more room, more patience, more options, more dignity. The ability to look at the world and say, I do not need to panic because my machine is finally working for me. Most people never reach that sentence. Not because it is reserved for geniuses, because they never chose the machine,